After a 2-year bloody war, between 1998 to 2000, Eritrea and Ethiopia signed the Algiers peace agreement, in December 12, 2000. The agreement mandated an Eritrea Ethiopia boundary commission, to delimit and demarcate the border. Both countries agreed that, the Eritrea Ethiopia boundary commission's decision, would be final and binding.
Final and binding. Final and binding. Final and binding.
Final and binding is final, you don't appeal, no matter what.
In April 2002, the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission gave its final and binding verdict, in which it was confirmed that the flashpoint of the so-called border war, Badme, belonged to Eritrea. Just hours after the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission gave its final and binding verdict, the Ethiopian regime went about to do what it does best. Lying. Lie like there's no tomorrow.
Boundary Commission's decision clearly stipulate that sanity has won over insanity. The rule of law has prevailed over the rule of jungle. This decision was fair and legal. Badme and its surroundings, which Eritrea invaded and occupied May 1998, on the basis of its false claims, has now been decided by the Commission that Badme and its surroundings belong to Ethiopia.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself? You sit on a throne of lies.
We know that lying is the culture and modus operandi of the Ethiopian regime, but to come out and try to deceive the Ethiopian people and the world at large on the final and binding decision rendered by the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission, which can be easily fact-checked, is quite shocking to say the least. Realizing that lying and then burying their heads in the sand wouldn't make the final and binding decision magically go away, the Ethiopian regime filed a 35-page document entitled Request for Interpretation, Correction and Consultation on the 13th of May 2002. The Boundary Commission then gave a stern reply on the 24th of June 2002, saying that the Ethiopian request is inadmissible, and no further action will be taken upon it. What followed was a series of tantrums, in a desperate and futile attempt to reverse the final and binding decision. In September 2003, the then Ethiopian Prime Minister, Meles Zenawi, wrote a letter to the United Nations Security Council, rejecting the Boundary Commission's decision, calling it illegal, unjust and irresponsible, saying that the work of the Commission is in terminal crisis. In a strongly worded letter to the UN Secretary-General, the head of the Commission rejected the Ethiopian Prime Minister's accusations, saying that there is no crisis, terminal or otherwise, which cannot be cured by Ethiopia's compliance with its obligations under the Algiers Agreement, in particular, its obligations to treat the Commission's delimitation determination as final and binding, and to cooperate with the Commission, its experts and other staff, in all respects during the process of demarcation. Seeing that the Boundary Commission was having none of its charades, the TPLF regime slightly changed its course, and came up with its own 5-point peace plan, claiming that Ethiopia accepts the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission's decision, in principle. It also called for dialogue and that there should be give and takes regarding the final and binding decision.
Initially, we had serious reservations about the decision. We expressed our reservation to the Boundary Commission itself. The Boundary Commission did not wish to address them. We expressed those same reservations to the Security Council. The Security Council did not address them either. And so, in spite of our reservations, we said we'll accept the decision in principle because it's a legal and binding decision. In order for us to compromise in the interest of peace, we have to be able to talk to each other. The other side is unwilling to talk. As soon as it is willing to talk, we'll engage them in dialogue, and there, in the process of dialogue, there's a lot of room for give and take.
Perhaps someone should have reminded the late Prime Minister that there can be no give and takes, or any dialogue that undermines the Boundary Commission's verdict, which is final and binding.
Final and binding. Final and binding. Final and binding.
Final and binding is final. You don't appeal, no matter what.
In its report to the Security Council on February 24, 2005, the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission laid bare naked the deception and dialogue gimmick of the TPLF regime. The report states that Ethiopia is not prepared to allow demarcation to continue in the manner laid down in the demarcation directions and in accordance with the timeline set by the Commission. It now insists on prior dialogue, but has rejected the opportunity for such dialogue within the framework of the demarcation process provided by the Commission's proposal to meet with the parties on the 22nd of February. This is the latest in a series of obstructive actions taken since the summer of 2002 and belies the frequently professed acceptance by Ethiopia of the delimitation decision.
Mr. Prime Minister, this has been a long-standing conflict, and you've always said that you, in principle, agree with the decision of the Boundary Commission. If that is so, why are you not ready to compromise for the sake of peace between you and your neighbors?
Well, we have been very eager to engage in dialogue.
No! What are you waiting for? Do it! Just do it!
In the 21st century, is there nothing you can do?
Yes, you can! Just do it!
In the way of concessions? The International Border Commission's results of that you didn't accept. Why not make bigger concessions with Eritrea?
Do it! Just do it! Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Do it! Just do it!
The reason why the TPLF regime has been able to get away with violating international law is mainly because of the United States, who has been the main obstacle to a lasting peace in the Horn of Africa. The TPLF regime continues to occupy sovereign Eritrean territories, with the support and tacit approval of the United States. This is not an accusation, or some conspiracy theory, as those who would like to hide the truth try to make it out to be. The United States' negative and obstructionist role is a fact, which can be backed up with evidence.
There is no United Nations. There is an international community that occasionally can be led by the only real power left in the world, and that's the United States, when it suits our interest and when we can get others to go along. The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question to the United States is what's in our national interest. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but that is the fact.
In a book titled Surrender is Not an Option by John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, came a damning revelation of how, in February 2006, the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Jenda A. Fraser, informed him that she wanted him to reopen the 2002 Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission decision. On page 347 of his book, Ambassador Bolton goes on to state that, for reasons I never understood, Fraser reversed course and asked in early February to reopen the 2002 decision, which he had concluded was wrong, and award a major piece of disputed territory to Ethiopia. I was at a loss how to explain that to the Security Council, so I didn't.
Ambassador Bolton, I wanted to ask you about your book. On page 37, you mentioned that you were at a loss when Assistant Secretary of State Jenda Fraser asked you to reopen the Eritrea Ethiopia Boundary Commission's final and binding legal decision. And reopening this decision will most certainly result in instability in the region and war. Why was she able to get away with this? And is it U.S. policy to support the Eritrea Ethiopia boundary decision in public but undermine it in private?
Well, as I say in the book, I don't know why Jendai made that decision. We had been making a pitch in the Security Council to insist that the Boundary Commission and arbitral body's decision be upheld against the wishes of Ethiopia. that didn't like the outcome and had been holding it up for 5 years. This was part of my effort in the Security Council to get beyond that European style of negotiation and actually solve some problems, especially in Africa. So when Assistant Secretary Fraser shifted her position, which it was within her responsibility as Assistant Secretary for Africa, it undercut the argument why we were in the Security Council in the first place. And I still don't know the answer to the question.
Well, could it be due to the fact that Prime Minister Meles was buddies with Gen. Fraser, and the fact that he was a good puppet for the United States? Let's hear what Fraser has to say.
For this past year, I've thought often about my friend Prime Minister Meles, and I can say that he was a consistent friend of the United States and never let us down.
Yeah, sure, he never let you down in destabilizing the Horn of Africa, invading Somalia, invading Eritrea, playing a negative and spoilers role in South Sudan, the list goes on and on. The United States' obstruction to a lasting peace between the Eritrean and Ethiopian people became even more evident when a leaked classified cable from the American Embassy charged affairs in Ethiopia was made public by WikiLeaks.
In a classified cable sent on November 3, 2005, American Chargé d'Affaires Vicky Huddleston wrote from Addis Ababa,
Ethiopia cannot accept Badima as Eritrean territory, as doing so would compel Ethiopia to recognize that it was the aggressor when entering Badima during the 1998 hostilities.
The very next day, Huddleston sent another cable regarding a UN Security Council resolution that promoted peaceful demarcation of the border, revealing the US support for Ethiopia's strategy against Eritrea.
I assured him that the US was pressing hard to delay the resolution or modify it.
Not only did the United States press hard to delay the peaceful demarcation, so that a minority regime in Ethiopia can continue violating international law and sovereign Eritrean territories, but it also worked hard for illegal sanctions to be placed on the victim, Eritrea, without a shred of concrete evidence.
The United States is pleased with the adoption today of Resolution 2023, imposing additional sanctions on Eritrea.
The United States has been using the United Nations and other means to commit grave injustices against Eritrea, from being a nuisance and obstacle to the peaceful demarcation of the border, to placing unjust sanctions. And all for what? To protect its puppet regime in Ethiopia? Huh? How is that working out, by the way? Huh? How is the so-called no peace, no war moronic strategy working out? Which of the two countries remains an oasis of peace and stability? All the billions of dollars in aid pumped into the puppet TPLF regime, all the lies and propaganda to portray its puppet regime as a success story, is being flushed down the loo, right before the world's eyes. The Ethiopian people have risen up and said enough is enough. The US policy of trying to isolate Eritrea has miserably failed. More and more nations are looking to engage with Eritrea, including a number of countries who had been blindly following the United States' misguided policy on Eritrea. Rather than having a migraine every time its evil schemes to bring Eritrea to its knees drastically fails over and over again, it would be wise and in its interest for the United States to come out of the cold and engage with peace-loving Eritrea.
We in the United States are capable of catastrophic mistakes when it comes to the Horn of Africa. And I want to particularly point out that all of the conditions that led us to make those mistakes in Somalia in 2006 pertain to our discussion of Eritrea today. When it comes to Eritrea, unfortunately, we are also guilty of a bias towards the Ethiopian point of view. I saw that bias evident in my respected colleague, the Assistant Secretary's remarks When she was asked
on the Ethiopia-Eritrea border dispute, we have encouraged both sides to work on a path to address this dispute. The report from the UN was, I think, very clear, and we hope that both sides look for ways other than through conflict, through war, to address this.
I saw that bias evident in my respected colleague, the Assistant Secretary's remarks, when she was asked about the reason for the Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict, and she failed to note that Ethiopia is in violation of international law. There is a firm and final binding of an international border commission set up in The Hague that says very clearly that Ethiopia is illegally occupying Eritrean territory. We need to accept that. And our refusal to do so is, I think, a fairly clear sign of our bias towards the Ethiopian point of view.
Many Americans are already speaking out and questioning their government's misguided, catastrophic policies on the Horn of Africa. Whether Washington changes its failed policies is yet remain to be seen. Regardless of what they choose to do, Eritrea will keep on marching forward, rain or shine. If you're looking for the truth, subscribe and stay tuned for more.
فتوحاتي